Welcome to Court with Judy 5, where every week we dive into real, gripping courtroom drama. From shocking verdicts to unexpected twists, each case takes you closer to the truth. I'm your host, guiding you through every step of justice. We'll explore high-stakes decisions, personal struggles, and the power of law. Each story reminds us why justice matters. So, join me as we uncover the unforgettable moments in every case.
The courtroom was supposed to be routine that day. Another docket filled another session where Judge Judy's sharp questions cut through excuses and evasions. The audience gathered as they always did, whispering with anticipation, eager to witness the woman whose reputation stretched far beyond the walls of any courtroom. For decades, Judge Judy had been a figure of authority and command. Someone who carried the weight of experience not as decoration, but as a weapon. Yet on this day, something different stirred in the air, something heavier. No one could have predicted that the first words spoken by a single heckler would ignite a confrontation so powerful it would redefine the meaning of respect itself. She called herself Karen Loud, brash, unfiltered, the kind of person who thrived on spectacle rather than substance. She was known for interruptions, for sneering at anyone who stood taller than her. But even by her standards, what she said next carried a venom that silenced the room, with an exaggerated laugh. She leaned forward and, in a tone dripping with mockery, said the words that would echo through the rest of the session. "That law degree of yours doesn't mean much, does it? Anybody can wave a piece of paper. It doesn't make you smarter than the rest of us." The gasp was immediate. It felt as though glass had shattered in the middle of the room. People exchanged glances, unsure whether they had heard correctly. Had this woman, this self-appointed critic, just dismissed the lifetime of experience Judge Judy carried? Had she reduced decades of hard-won battles, countless cases, and a career that reshaped how Americans viewed justice to nothing more than a piece of paper? The arrogance in Karen's voice was more than an insult. It was an attempt to strip credibility, to question authority, to unravel the very fabric of what the courtroom represented. For a moment, the room froze. It wasn't only the audience that waited. Even the cameras seemed to still, their lenses fixed on the quiet figure behind the bench. Judge Judy did not move. She did not rush to answer. She didn't even blink. Instead, her silence became the weapon. Her eyes locked on Karen. And in that pause, something far more powerful than anger began to form. It was the calm before the storm, the moment when strength reveals itself not through volume, but through unshakable composure. Then came the response, subtle at first, but unmistakable. Judge Judy leaned forward, her voice measured and steady, carrying the kind of weight sharpened by silence. She acknowledged the mockery, but framed it as more than a personal insult. She exposed it for what it truly was, a symptom of deeper arrogance. The belief that authority can be dismissed simply because it makes someone uncomfortable. She reminded the room not through shouting, but through facts that her law degree was never the source of her power. It was merely the door she had walked through. What kept her standing? What forged her reputation? What cemented her authority? Were the thousands of battles fought in courtrooms, the millions of lives her decisions had touched, and the unflinching consistency with which she placed truth above convenience. Yet even as she revealed this, she held something back. She did not unleash the full force of her rebuttal. Not yet. She kept it coiled, waiting like a spring. The audience could sense it. Karen could sense it. This was not the end of the exchange, was the beginning of a dismantling so complete that it would leave Karen exposed. Her arrogance reduced to dust. Judy had revealed just enough to remind everyone who she was, while holding back enough to leave the confrontation charged with promise something bigger, sharper, more devastating still to come. Karen smirked, mistaking Judy's restraint for weakness. But what Karen failed to understand was that Judge Judy had stood in this position countless times before. She knew the power of timing. She knew the value of letting an opponent feel safe just long enough to overstep, to trap themselves in the very arrogance they used as a weapon. Judy was not merely defending a degree, she was defending the principle. Behind it's a truth, that authority, built on justice, cannot be erased by mockery. The audience leaned forward, their anticipation thick as a tide, pulling them closer. They were not simply watching a courtroom exchange. They were witnessing a duel between arrogance and credibility, between mockery and mastery. As the silence stretched, every eye in the room turned toward Judge Judy, waiting for the moment they knew was coming. She did not need to raise her voice. She did not need to trade insults. All she needed was to remind Karen and everyone watching that respect is not given and it cannot be stolen. It is earned. The hook had been set. The claim had been made, and the unspoken promise that Judge Judy was about to deliver the most devastating rebuttal the room had ever seen hung in the air like a storm cloud ready to break. What Karen believed was a clever insult was about to become the very stage on which she would be dismantled, not by rage, but by reason. Not by shouting, but by truth. Once Judy began, nothing Karen could say would stop what followed, because this was no longer just about a law degree. It was not about one woman mocking another. It was about the very meaning of credibility itself. Could arrogance tear down what decades of work had built? Or would truth stand taller than mockery? That was the battle now taking shape. That was the clash about to unfold. For those watching inside the courtroom and through the cameras, that would soon carry the moment to millions. The anticipation was electric. Everyone sensed they were standing at the edge of a confrontation that would not only silence Karen, but remind the world why Judge Judy's name carried a weight no insult could diminish. Now only one question remained. Would Karen realize too late the storm she had invited upon herself? The insult still lingered in the air, but its meaning stretched far beyond Karen's mocking words. Everyone in that courtroom understood this was about more than a single exchange. If Karen's jab went unanswered, if Judge Judy allowed the mockery to remain hanging in the room, it would not only bruise her credibility, there it would echo far beyond those walls. Cameras were rolling. Reporters were writing. And beyond the courtroom, millions would watch, replay, and decide for themselves whether authority had been shaken or reaffirmed. That was the true stake. A lifetime of work, decades of rulings. And the iron reputation Judge Judy had earned could not be reduced to silence in that moment. Karen's arrogance was not merely personal. It had become symbolic. It represented every voice that had dismissed education, every sneer aimed at hard work, every arrogant whisper meant to tear down someone who had climbed too high. If Karen's insult stood, the message would spread easily that arrogance could defeat authority, that mockery could outweigh mastery, that noise could silence truth. But the opposite could also happen, and that was where the tension deepened. If Judge Judy chose to answer, she turned Karen's arrogance into a stage for clarity and convictions. Then something unforgettable would happen. The world would not remember Karen's words. It would remember Judy's response. The insult would not define the moment. The comeback would. The stakes no longer belonged only to the courtroom. They stretched into the larger meaning of respect itself. Millions watching at home were not searching only for drama. They were searching for proof that experience still mattered. Proof that truth could not be erased by mockery. Proof that even in an age of noise and spectacle, authority grounded in justice could still rise above arrogance. For Judge Judy, this was not merely another case. It was a test of whether her voice still carried the force that had made her legendary. For Karen, it was a gamble she did not yet understand she had already lost. And for everyone else, it was a moment that would either confirm or shake their belief in the power of integrity. The room braced itself. The insults had been thrown. The stakes had been set. Now the only question was who would own the moment when the storm finally broke. Karen's words still echoed as she leaned back in her chair, crossed her arms, and wore a smirk that dared anyone to challenge her. She believed she had won the moment. She believed she had punctured the armor of a woman whose entire career had been built on authority. The audience felt the sting as well. Whispers moved through the room, a nervous current of disbelief. Some shook their heads. Others waited in silence, their eyes shifting between Judge Judy's calm expression and Karen's mocking grin. Judge Judy did not answer. Immediately, that silence, that unbroken calm, was her first strike. Where? Karen used provocation. Judy used composure. She placed her pen down slowly, deliberately, the click echoing through the tense air like a gavel. Then, with her eyes fixed on Karen, she began to speak. Her tone was not sharp or angry. It was measured, precise. Carrying the weight of countless courtrooms behind it, she acknowledged Karen's remark not to validate it, but to frame it. So, you think a degree is just paper? Judy began, her voice steady. A decoration without meaning. Let me tell you what mine has done. The room leaned in. It did not sound boastful. It sounded factual. She described her journey not in grand claims, but in truths that landed with force. She spoke of long nights buried in legal texts, of trials fought not in theory, but in persistence and discipline, of people who entered her courtroom broken and left with dignity because the law had worked for them. She explained that her law degree was not a trophy on a shelf. It was a tool forged in real cases, sharpened by opposition, tested repeatedly until it became more than paper. Karen's smirk weakened, if only slightly, as Judy's words drew a clear contrast. Karen had tried to reduce everything to a single document. Judy had turned it into a history of battles fought and victories earned. But she was not finished. She leaned forward, her tone sharpening not through anger, but through precision. You see, the measure of a lawyer is not found in a diploma, she said, her gaze unwavering. It is found in what that diploma has done in the real world. Mine has stood beside people who needed justice when no one else would stand with them. That is what gives it weight. That is what makes it real. The silence deepened, every word hanging heavily in the room. Even the reporters paused, listening more than writing. Karen shifted in her seat, tapping her fingers against the table as though trying to hide the discomfort. She had expected outrage, perhaps defensiveness. Instead, Judy answered with conviction, with a reality that left little room for dismissal. The first exchange had ended, and everyone in the room knew it. Karen had thrown her insult like a weapon. Judge Judy had caught it, broken it in her hands, and returned it as truth. And everyone watching could feel it. The tide had begun to turn. The tension in the room climbed higher as Karen leaned forward again, trying to recover ground. Her voice came louder now, edged with strain. All that talk still doesn't change the fact that your degree is just a piece of paper. Anyone can claim authority, but that doesn't make you better than the rest of us. It was the opening Judge Judy had been waiting for. She did not flinch. She did not blink. Instead, she leaned in with a focus that made the room feel even heavier. Her response came with surgical precision. "You're right about one thing," she said. "A piece of paper by itself proves nothing. But when that paper represents decades of justice, when it has defended families, upheld rights, and held the powerful accountable, it stops being paper. It becomes proof of purpose." A wave of murmurs spread across the room. Reporters wrote furiously. The audience leaned closer, sensing they were witnessing something unforgettable. Judy continued, her voice calm but unmistakably commanding. "If you think mocking my degree diminishes me, then you misunderstand completely. You do not diminish me. You expose yourself. Because in this room, authority is not granted by arrogance. It is earned by truth. The silence that followed felt louder than sound itself. Karen's smirk disappeared, replaced by the uneasy stillness of someone beginning to understand that she had invited a storm. She could no longer control. Judge Judy had turned the insult into a declaration, and the crowd felt it immediately. This was the moment the balance shifted, the moment she stopped merely defending herself and fully took command of the room. For a brief moment, Karen sat in silence, blinking beneath the weight of Judy's words, but arrogance rarely knows when to stop. She shifted in her seat, crossed her arms again, and answered with a loud, dismissive laugh. You talk a big game, but you're hiding behind stories. Real lawyers, the ones who come from top schools, don't waste time with theatrics. They argue with intellect. Then she gestured mockingly toward Judy. And you just argue with emotion. Gasps moved through the courtroom. It was a bold accusation, clearly meant to recover lost ground to paint Judy as a performer rather than a professional. But in reality, Karen's words exposed desperation. She had already seen the audience move toward Judy, and this was her attempt to pull attention back by attacking the foundation of Judy's credibility. Judge Judy did not rush to answer. She leaned back, folded her hands on the bench, allowed Karen's words to remain in the air until they seemed to weaken under their own emptiness. Then, in a voice firm but controlled, she responded, emotion. She repeated the words slowly, allowing it to settle. Double quotes, no. What I argue with is reality. Her gaze never left Karen. You see, the law is not a debate club. It is not an ivory tower where professors exchange theories. It is a lifeline for people who would be crushed if no one stood for them. She paused, then continued with sharpened clarity. I have stood in courtrooms where eviction notices threatened to put children on the street. I have ruled in cases where lives depended on fairness, not on how impressive the name on a diploma sounded. Another pause. Emotion. No, ma'am. That is called humanity. And if you think humanity has no place in the law, then you do not understand the law at all. A murmur of approval spread through the room. Even the reporters, trained to remain detached, looked up from their notebooks. Drawn fully into the exchange, Karen stiffened, her face tightening. You think your so-called humanity makes you better than everyone else? She snapped, her tone rising. It's convenient to hide behind sad stories when you don't have the education or prestige to back you up. The words landed like a final desperate card played too late. For a moment, the air thickened, but Judy's answer came immediately, steady, sharp, untouched by agitation. Education is not defined by the building where you sit in class. It is defined by what you do with it after you walk out the door. Her voice remained calm, but every word struck with force. There are people with the finest degrees who have spent their careers defending power. And there are people with ordinary degrees who have spent theirs defending justice for those without power. Then came the question that settled over the room. Which one matters more? Karen faltered. Her eyes shifted, searching for an answer that did not come. The room, however, already understood Judy had shifted the argument again away from prestige, away from arrogance, and directly toward purpose. But Judy was not finished. Her voice became even steadier, each word placed with the weight of iron laid brick by brick. A law degree is not a trophy. It is not a shield for arrogance. It is a responsibility. Mine has worked every day, not for headlines, not for applause, but for justice. Can you say the same about what you have done? The silence that followed felt overwhelming. Karen opened her mouth, then stopped, realizing that anything she offered would sound hollow. The audience saw it. The reporters felt it. The cameras captured. It's a precise moment when arrogance met truth and began to fracture under its own weight. Still, stubbornness pushed Karen to force one last laugh, brittle and thin, exposing the cracks already forming beneath her confidence. "You think you've won just because the crowd is on your side?" she sneered. "This is just entertainment." Judy leaned forward once more, her eyes unwavering. "No, this is not entertainment. This is a reminder that respect is earned, not mocked. That justice is lived, not performed. And that no matter how loud arrogance tries to be, truth will always be louder." The words landed with the force of thunder. The courtroom erupted not into chaos, but into applause that briefly rose beyond attempts to restore order. Karen had doubled down, but in doing so, she had only deepened the ground beneath her feet. Judge Judy had not merely defended her law degree, she had transformed the exchange into a lesson, a clear demonstration of why arrogance eventually collapses before integrity. The applause still echoed, yet Judy did not allow it to alter her focus. She did not smile. She did not absorb the approval. She remained steady, posture composed, eyes fixed on Karen with a patience that cut deeper than any visible anger. It was the composure of someone who had weathered larger storms than this. Someone who understood that authority is not built on noise, but on conviction that does not move. Karen tried once more to seize control, lifting her chin as though the room's reaction had not unsettled her. "You can talk all you want," she scoffed, "but nothing changes the fact that you hide behind your so-called experience. If you were truly great, you would have gone to the best schools, stood with the best lawyers, argued the biggest cases, but you didn't. You're just a TV judge who thinks her degree makes her special." The words were sharp, but desperation had begun to show through them. The audience sensed it immediately. The murmurs that followed carried disbelief rather than support. Karen was no longer striking effectively. She was digging deeper with weaker tools. Judge Judy still did not answer with anger. Instead, she leaned forward, her voice calm, carrying the unmistakable force of a gavel striking wood. "Do you know what makes a degree powerful?" she asked quietly. The room hushed instantly to hear her. "It is not the name of the university. It is not the shine of a diploma. It is the justice it produces." Her gaze remained steady. "My degree has protected families from eviction, preserved the rights of the powerless, and reminded this country that no one is above accountability. That is what gives it power. That is what makes it real." Her words did more than answer Karen's accusation. They shifted the entire argument. This was no longer about prestige. It was about the purpose of law itself. She was no longer defending only herself. She was speaking for every lawyer dismissed unfairly, every student told their school was not enough, every voice diminished by arrogance. The cameras moved closer, catching the intensity in her expression. Reporters wrote faster now, already aware they were recording the line that would define the moment. And the audience, once divided by uncertainty, had become united in silence, leaning into every word. Judge Judy continued, her voice sharpening further, cutting through Karen's remaining resistance. "If your definition of greatness is prestige, then you have misunderstood justice entirely. The law does not live in marble halls or ivory towers. It lives in the lives of the people it touches. It lives in the tenant who keeps her home. It lives in the tenant who keeps her home. It lives in the worker whose rights are defended. It lives in the child who receives a fair chance because the law stood on their side. That is where the law breathes. That is where my degree has lived. Tell me, Karen, where has yours lived?" The question landed with the force of a hammer. Karen froze, her mouth slightly open, the smirk that had carried her through the exchange collapsing in real time. She had no answer. None. And the silence that followed was not merely uncomfortable, it was devastating. Judy allowed that silence to remain, letting it reveal the emptiness behind Karen's attack. Then, with deliberate calm, she delivered the line that defined the moment. If your degree teaches you to defend power without questioning it, then it is nothing more than a shield for the privileged. But if mine teaches me to stand with the powerless, then it is a sword for justice, and I will always choose the sword. The room erupted. Gasps, applause, even scattered cheers broke through the air despite repeated attempts to restore order. The force of her words had cut through arrogance and struck something deeper: truth. It was not merely rhetoric. It was a declaration of values, a reminder that authority is measured not by prestige, but by purpose. Karen sat rigid, her face flushed, her hands trembling slightly as she tried to gather another response. None came. Her earlier confidence had vanished, her sharp remarks reduced to nothing against Judy's conviction. For the first time, the room no longer saw a challenger in control. It saw someone exposed, diminished by the very arrogance she had relied upon. Judge Judy leaned back in her chair, her expression calm, almost serene. She did not smile. She did not celebrate. She allowed the moment to stand on its own. And it did. Because everyone in that courtroom, man soon far beyond it, understood they had witnessed something larger than an argument. They had watched arrogance dismantled by truth. Beyond the courtroom, the ripple would begin immediately. Clips would spread, headlines would form. And the defining phrase, "a shield for the privileged," or "a sword for justice," would travel across screens and conversations alike. But inside the room, the effect was already complete. Respect had been restored. Authority had been reaffirmed. And Karen was left with nothing except the hollow echo of her own mockery. This was Judge Judy's defining blow, not a shout, not anger, but truth delivered so sharply that it silenced arrogance and reminded everyone why her name carried a weight no insult could erase. When the session ended, the contrast was unmistakable. Karen's mockery had dissolved into silence, while Judge Judy's words remained like a gavel strike, echoing far beyond the courtroom walls. What began as an insult ended as a reminder that respect is not granted through arrogance. It is earned through truth, conviction, and justice. And in that moment, Judy did more than win the room. She reminded the world why her voice still carries power.